Hey guys, what's going on? This is Lucas with the Retic Lounge. Thank you so much for all the support so far. We are really excited to bring to you this interview with Eric Lee today. He was our very first interview of a new segment of our Locality talk, and we get to talk to him about Calatoas. I know a lot of you are excited about this episode, just as much as we are. There's a couple things that I wanted to let you guys know before you dive in. So first and foremost, I want to apologize. We had some audio issues. My mic was not working that night, and there's another mic that picked up the audio, so that doesn't sound that great. And in addition to that, the streaming service that we're using always has some hiccups during interviews. So for the first 5 to 8 minutes of this episode, there's a little bit of talking over. It's a little bit of out of sync, but we were able to get the rest of the episode to be great for you guys. We thought about salvaging it and kind of redoing the episode, but after listening to the episode, I don't think we could recreate what we were able to do with Eric, and we are really excited for you guys to watch it. So again, sorry about those issues, but I promise it is going to be worth every bit of it once you get through those first few minutes. Enjoy. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. I'd love to know what you guys think about this episode. Enjoy listening, everyone. We're back and we got Eric with us. Eric, how's it going, man?
Pretty good, guys. How you doing?
No
Doing great, man.
Here. Appreciate you coming on to kick us off on our first locality spotlight and talk about Calatoas.
No problem. My
I
pleasure.
feel like when we're talking about Calatoas in general, there's a few big names that come up, but I don't think people realize just how many different adult Calatoas that you have.
I've had quite a few. It just kind of, I've always known that I was doing snow stuff, but with that, it's like I need enough diversity where I'm not just constantly cranking out the same stuff that are all related. So from day one, even before I produced snows, I already started collecting the Calatoas, and before the ban, they were literally nothing because no one cared about the ST stuff. So it kind of benefited me where I was like, here, let me get all these Calatoas. Then the ban went through, then everyone's like, oh, they're kind of pricey now. So it's kind of ridiculous when you look at how much they were before 2015. Then even people were dumping them right before, like the two Leonard girls I got. Like people lose their minds when I tell them what I paid for them back then.
Like that?
No, $325 shipped for both.
Starting.
And then the crazy thing is, when I messaged him, he had, I want to say 30, maybe high 20s, low 30s, whatever in the clutch. He sold that clutch up in, I think, 12 minutes. When I messaged him originally, he was like, I was like, hey, I want a pair. Then he's like, it took him forever to get back to me because all these people were, and he's like, oh, I have a females. And me being stupid, I didn't think, I was like, oh, I'll just take two. I should have been like, dude, I'll take anything you have at the time.
You're talking about going back all the way to 2015. If you don't mind, do you mind sharing kind of like when you got into retics and just kind of that story and when you kicked off with them?
Basically, my first. Let's see here. This is pre-internet days, so my first retic I think I got in 91 or 92 when I was 11. I got it at basically a mom and pop, like, fish store that had a little, like, one cubicle reptile section. I picked up what ended up being a Sumatran, had that girl for about 15 years before I moved my entire collection out. So I started in about 91, 92-ish and had a collection until about 2004, right before I left for the military. And back then it was retics, red tail boas, like all the true BCC and BCI stuff, and scrubs. Then I ended up selling the entire collection right before I went active duty after college.
In the Army, by the way?
So,
I've always meant to have this conversation with you, and I never did. But you were in the Army?
Yep, did 2 deployments to Iraq, then came out, did police thing, did National Guard thing.
Sweet.
Now I just do the snake thing.
And I know you've mentioned in past videos that you wanted to eventually go back and get shot at some more. I'm guessing now that you're married, that's behind you, or still?
Oh no, maybe? I'd go back. I'd leave everything.
I
So
believe it. I believe it.
the wife knows. I've already like Garrett's always like, hey, if you leave and you want to move stuff, we can do permanent breeding loans here. I
You're
mean,
like, I've been training someone on the side.
yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like the snakes are great, but I mean, there's things that you love to do and other things that you would literally drop everything to do. So it's just one of
I'd
those
love to
things.
hear that because I think there's so many people in the retic industry that end up revolving their entire life around the animals, and it's always important to realize. Yeah,
Oh no,
it's
absolutely.
important to realize there are things outside of the love we have for these animals.
Yeah, and I think the main issue a lot of people get burnt out. It's not necessarily like the workload. The workload's a lot, especially if you have big collections. You get burnt out because literally you're anchored to your house, your collection. You can't leave. You don't trust people to come over, and it's not even a theft thing. It's more of a, hey, if I have so and so come over, I don't know if they have mice out. Like I don't have a lot of people
Yeah,
coming to my house, hardly ever, and
Mhm.
it's never really a theft thing for me. It's oh, I know this person has a lot of animals. They turn over a lot of animals, and I don't want that in my collection. Like I don't really associate with anyone that I'm like, hey, I don't trust them in my house type of thing. It's more like you deal with a lot of animals. You go to a lot of places that have animals, and like I just don't want that in the collection. Especially right now with me doing the new breeder room. Eventually, whenever that happens, I'm gonna probably trim it down even more, where I don't really let too many people in at all after that. Because I'm hoping after I get that my new breeder room set up, it'll be a completely closed collection after that. Nothing's going in because I pretty much have
that's
all the projects I
perfect.
need at this point.
How far out are you on that new
That's a
room? Because
touchy
I know you're
subject.
almost doubling or tripling
Basically, it was
your
done.
square footage.
Then the
That's a touchy
contractor was
subject.
not the best guy in the world, and I'm getting the whole thing redone on top of it being already redone like once or twice. It's just been a nightmare because you deal with alleged like licensed contractors that subcontract to a bunch of scabs, and they ruin everything.
Hey,
So,
but you'll get it done
And
right
that's
eventually.
the one thing I
yep.
respect about you is like you're like right off the bat you're not taking any shortcuts. And that's huge. I mean, it just goes to show how much you care about the animals and the investment that you're putting in.
Well, that and I think the big push for us to survive, especially in the retake game, is to show out the outside world like, hey, it's more than just breeding. Because breeding's cool, but from an outsider looking in, for 99% of us, like I don't really know too many people, if any, that do retakes that keep it like in a naturalistic, like the Europeans. The Europeans are huge about nice, big, naturalistic, very nice, fancy looking enclosures. Everyone here, for the most part, paper, maybe cocoa,
Hmm.
Reptile, whatever, and it's functional. But looking out from the inside or outside looking in, you're like, oh, that doesn't look like a lot of
It's
room and
true.
blah blah blah. And like for us to grow the community, you're like, hey, it's more than the breeding. Like if you're doing it because you want to further what a project, it's great. But at the end of the day, like your passion for the animal should come first before, hey, I'm gonna make X amount of dollars
Yeah.
or whatever the project is. And I think my goal for the room is all the cages are enormous. Everyone that knows what I'm doing, they're like, why? That's such a waste. You could put so many more cages or so many more animals. Like, I don't want more. Basically, my room now is about, I think, 165 square feet, give or take. I'm going into like a 420 square foot room, and I'm going to cut my collection down by a third, if not more, because the cages are going to be 8x3s, 6x3s, and 5.5x3s, plus my big 21 footer. So it's like, I don't want more animals. I want less, but I want everything. I'm going to shoot for bioactive and just see what happens. I either do great at it or I crash and burn. So we'll see.
love the mindset, do or die. Um, so you mentioned about like talking about the community. So just as a reminder for you guys, like, subscribe, comment, subscribe on the Retic Lounge YouTube, listen to us on Spotify, Apple Music, and of course, join our Patreon for backseat access. We're starting to put some videos and exclusive content on there for those of you that are part of it, and we have a great Discord chat. So cheers to you guys. Appreciate the support, and come be a Retic Lounger. Um, let's get into Calatoas because this is what this is about, right? Um, so I'm curious to you. So you were just sending me the pictures. I was asking for them, but how many different bloodlines of Calatoas do you have? And what I mean by bloodlines, just unrelated.
Right now, I have the Leonard stuff, the TK stuff from two different people. One directly from Travis, another from Shannon Robke. What else do I have? The stuff I produced from those pairings. Then I had the wild caught. My wild caught male was a dud. I should have known it long ago because he did 7 different breedings for me. None of them panned out ever.
Hmm.
So and he eventually went to Garrett as just a pet because
Yeah.
I was like, I don't need him. Then I had my wild caught girl that is basically the mom to my two 87.5% double het snail girls that hopefully will go this year. Then that's basically it. And I have like other pure SD stuff that to me they look Calatoa, but parents came in as 2003 imports, just pure SD. So I just call them
Yeah.
SD instead of
So
Calatoas.
I'm gonna kind of pull up the pictures that you have here, that you sent me, and so let's talk first about that 2013 TK line Calatoa. So for those of you that aren't familiar,
Okay.
TK line is Travis Cubis. He used to breed retics a while back, and he has probably, we were just talking about this, what Eric and even myself and Nathan, I don't know if you agree, but probably the only established Calatoa line out there, because it's one animal where you can look at and be like, oh, that's a TK line. Like they have that jagged, triangular, that kind of overlap, kind of like the zipper look that goes down.
Yep.
A lot of them are very bright, vibrant, and yellow when they're younger, and then become extremely silver as they age. And your female that I'm looking at here, how big is that girl?
She's probably about 8.5, 9 feet.
Okay. And how many pairings or clutches has she done for you?
Let's see here. 4.
4? Awesome. So she's seasoned.
Yeah.
Now, is the TK line, as far as the females go, the smallest of the
Yep.
3 lines that you work with?
The wild caught is the smallest, that girl, but I mean, when I got her, she was, I want to say 6.5 years old at about 5.5 feet. But honestly, I think it's more because she was way, way underfed. The guy was trying to breed her, which feeding her, I think he was feeding her like a medium rat a month. So
Oh no.
it took her a minute to start breeding.
Wow.
And even she's produced 3 clutches for me. Every single clutch is 2 eggs.
Is she the Partho girl?
The Partho girl, and she's the mom to the two 87.5, the double het snail girls. Basically, that was the only clutch, her first clutch, that has been viable. The other 2, she Parthoed out because I ran that wild caught male twice. And yeah,
Man.
she'd Partho out and she'd produce the 2, and then they end up after about 5-6 months, they just start having all kinds of issues and just pass.
I mean, I'm almost wondering and thinking, Nathan, are you frozen or are you just sitting there stoic? Oh, okay, he's there. All right.
No,
He looks
just
like the
looking at the
Joker
picture.
with
Sorry.
like half his face purple and the other, or not the Joker, but Two-Face. Anyways, so do you think that partially the reason why she might not be a good breeder is because she like was very underdeveloped with her feeding early on?
I mean, it's a possibility just because I never really asked the guy how old she was when he got her. So I don't know, like, he's, 12, 13 years old. And depending on when she came in, if she was like a hatchling or if she was already kind of grunty, so it's hard to say. But yeah, when I got her, she was way thin. And yeah, she wasn't in the best shape when I got her, that's for sure.
Because I mean, number one, let's start off the bat. Like wild caught super dwarfs in general are not always easy animals to breed. They've been known to be problematic, and I know a lot of people have actually gotten out of wild caught, like got out of the super dwarf game. I'm thinking of one breeder in particular, just because they've had issues with egg bound or just not having good clutches. But that's in the back of my mind of whether diet had anything to do with it. A lot of people, will get a hatchling and they'll ask me like, hey, am I feeding it enough? And it's like a 3-month-old hatchling, and they're like, yeah, I'm feeding it a rat fuzzy every like 2 to 3 weeks. And I'm like, you got to get that digestive system going. Like you got to get food in that baby's belly. So yeah, I'm wondering if that's a contributing factor, or just could be one of those wild caught animals that are just extremely difficult to breed.
That, or even like, people that have worked with wild caughts in the past, some of them just never acclimate. They might breed, but they might be poor breeders, or they're just very finicky. Like she never had an issue eating, but she just, and you could like she's basically the size of like a garden hose. So she's naturally, she'll slam jumbos, but she's naturally very thin.
Wow.
And half the times I'd be like, oh, okay, she's gonna lay. Then I'm like, because she'd lay the 2 good ones, and she'd lay almost, I think the most she had was like 6 others that they're almost about the same size. And I was like, holy crap, that's a lot of eggs coming out of something that small. But all those other eggs, they'd never vein. They'd just be yellow when you candle them from the get-go. But I think it
Yeah.
might just be a combination of maybe just malnourished those, critical years initially when she was in country with the original owner. Then when I got her, it's like, yeah, I'm gonna do something, but I think it was maybe past the point of no return where whatever deficiencies she had, and she wasn't gonna get rid of.
Yeah. So I sent the pictures over to Nathan. Nathan, if you have to pick one of his favorite Calatoas, which one would it be?
I really like how silver some of those Leonard girls are, and just how open the backs are. But I mean, everyone seems to like the TK stuff. I don't know. I'm partial to more of that
Yeah,
like
all
lighter
the
silver
girls,
stuff.
even the TK girl in that picture, she's really brown. Every single one of them, when they fire up, they're like straight silver. Like I've always had people that will mess with me privately. Are
Yeah.
they Henry? No. Are you sure? Everything, every single girl I've ever had, I always run a visual Henry too. So I know if after whenever they breed, first breedings will be like whatever Henry this or that, just so I know. And nothing's ever proved. I mean, I wish they did. I
Yeah.
actually have two of the girls that are just pure STs, no locality label, that actually proved head Henry this past season when I ran two visual Henry males to them. And I was like, oh, okay, that definitely helps for in the future.
Yeah. Never also a bad thing to run a visual Anery whatever to a pure super dwarf or a pure Calatoa because you're gonna end up having astronomical percentages. So it's really
Yep.
it's a win-win there no matter what.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's your favorite one to
Yeah.
work with?
For the Calatoas or
Yeah, for your Calatoas.
I guess it depends on what project you're plugging into, I'm sure.
yeah, I mean my big thing besides just making the pure Calatoas for diversity, the wild caught stuff is cool because they don't look like anything we have. Like even their head structure, like I don't know if it's from years of pushing or whatever when they were caught. Like that wild caught
Hmm.
girl, even that male is more kind of traditional looking, but that the girl's head, it has that weird like almost the whole front end's kind of like rounded and weird and kind of looks like not deformed, but it doesn't look like our typical like captive bred stuff where they have that nice kind of like triangular, kind of like arrow shaped head. So hers is kind of
Yeah.
like bulbous and weird. And one of her daughters has the same head structure, which is kind of cool.
Okay.
Yeah. I would say on my wild caught girl, she also like her head is much different than the TK male that I have. And I really think just like in general, when you're bringing in like wild, I'm sure if you go on Calatoa Island, there's so many other animals that don't look like what we consider to be the Calatoa type, right? Um, I bet there's such a diversity of looking, and I almost wonder if we got into this like issue with importation. Like, I mean, could you imagine being an exporter and you made a living, not making a lot of money. You're from the island, or you're doing everything you can to collect snakes to make a tiny living, and do that, and then you're importing snakes or exporting snakes into the U.S. And if a U.S. importer's like, that's not a Calatoa, that doesn't look Calatoa because of what we think Calatoa looks like I'm wondering how that would impact them. So I wonder if almost we have what we have at the state because we weren't open to snakes looking any different.
Or the opposite, where they're collecting from anywhere and everywhere and just labeling them. Because you got
Right.
your early
Hmm.
2000s, the 90s, they came in as pure SD because back then there was a huge market for it. So you figure
Right.
like everything goes, a lot of stuff goes through Indo. Back in the day, like even I did some imports with Herpetofana with Duncan McRae when I was in high school because back then the laws were, let's just say, very laxed. And like we get stuff in, but like I can only imagine like they even back then they're telling us, there's a couple hubs and all these guys go out in the islands, jungles, wherever collecting, and everything goes back to that hub. From that hub is when they get labeled XYZ, then they come to the states. So you figure after early 2000s when that push for the locality stuff came in, I can imagine, like you said, they're not making a lot of money. Like, hey, I got this in Borneo, Java, whatever. Well, let's just label it this. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure though
Whatever.
a lot of it is in a similar area just because I mean a lot of them are smaller. Obviously, you're not going to label a mainland and say, "Oh, it's an SD," but at the same time, it's like a lot of nondescript islands out there where they could be very distinct from each other, but they're just going to lump them together as Kalatoa, Karampa, Madu, or whatever.
Yeah. And then there's also the whole debate if do we have Karampas here or do we have Karumpas? Like, right? Like, it's just, it's so, um, we believe, I think, what we want to believe to make sure that we feel what we have is legit, but at the same time, there was just so much going on. Like, to what I was speaking to, I was talking to someone who has been around for a while, and he was saying, everyone, like, when you think of a Bali, what do you think of? Like, what's the first characteristic?
Yellowhead.
Yellowhead, right? But there's the entire northern side of Bali where there's silverheads.
Yeah.
And so we would get Balis. He was saying that we would get Balis into the United States with silverheads, and the importers would go, that's not a Bali. It doesn't have a yellow head. And they would literally fire them, not get any more snakes from them. And so what he thinks a lot of people were doing was they were like getting yellowhead animals that were from Java. Java has some yellowhead animals, and there's other islands that have some yellow-headed animals, and they would just get any snake with a yellow head and bring it in and say, this is a Bali yellowhead.
Yeah, I can totally see that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I really hope someone like goes out there and does the digging and research and actually tries to find out like what went down behind the scenes in the import export. Kind of like one of those old Netflix documentary series. Someone just like went in, dug deep.
Being as you've seen this for 30 years and you've been in and out of it, do you think any of that could be possible?
I think a lot of it, because like 90s, even like when I got back into reptiles in general, was in like 2012, and even back then there's like people I know that they would basically brown bag stuff and smuggle stuff in and random appliances, this and that. And like at the end of the day, you think of it like smuggling, like someone that does drugs or this or that. Yeah, you're gonna catch a couple, but for the 2, 3 you catch, there's probably another half dozen or more that get through. And you figure like, there's certain animals that we had here where like right after the ban's like, oh, I was banned and we wish we could have got it. Then all of a sudden certain breeders like, oh, look what I got. I got it before the
Yeah,
ban. There's no way.
look what I've been hiding.
Yeah, you're like, wait, that thing looks like a fucking hatchling. What do you mean you've had it for 3 years? Oh yeah, no, I've had it forever. Yeah, right. I mean, it it is what it is. I mean, at the end of the day, I think right now our big push could be more like pure breedings just to keep everything legit in the future. But at the same time, people just kind of like the morphs are cool. Don't get me wrong. I love the morphs, but when I did this in the 90s, there were no morphs. I think it's mid 90s. Jay had tigers, super tigers. Then later on the albinos. But I was getting like I think at my peak probably about 60 or 70 retakes, and every single one of those were all imports. They were meaner than shit.
That's awesome,
And
man.
it was like basically I go to LAX at fishing game there, and they're like, "Hey, what's that?" I'm like, "Oh, it's a retake." They're like, "Is it nice?" I'm like, "Nope." Wait, how many do you have in that thing? Oh, just one. That big crates for one snake. I'm like, yeah, and just all kinds of. And
Don't you know they're big?
yeah, and back then it was like you didn't like retakes were throwaway animals back then. Just because like, oh, they're mean, they're nasty. But like, I got some crazy stuff. Like, I tried to find pictures on King Snake because I used to put stuff on King Snake when the internet started and all that. But yeah, they had these crazy ones that I look back now, I'm like, oh, this totally looks like a GS, or that looks like, maybe a Jag or something crazy from Malaysia and all this and all that. But who knows?
That's pretty awesome.
And back then you were just keeping them as pets. You weren't breeding them much.
No, I was still breeding. Like when I originally got, I think my first breeding was late 90s. I think it was my junior year. And it was, it was funny because back then, like I worked at Calazoo in an intern. So I had hookups with Vision back in the day. And back in the day,
Oh, okay. So that's why you're so partial.
Well, I mean, Visions are functional to an extent. But like back then, I was paying $150 for those 632s, and I'd get a rental from
Wow.
drive up to Canoga Park, talk to I can't remember his name, whoever was running it back then when they were in Canoga Park, and just load up a U-Haul with my learner's permit because my older brother would go with me and be like, "Oh, okay." I was like, "Oh, Ty from Kalamazoo said you're gonna hook me up." Oh, Scott, I forgot his last name, but yeah, I just get a bunch of cages, and I use those cages all the way through. But when I was breeding, like I had one day, like I came home, I was like, I'm gonna do an intro, and I had probably a 15, 16 foot male tiger, and I had a probably 17 and a half foot Sumatran. Like, oh, okay, like come home for after school. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do an intro. I do an intro. They go batshit crazy, shred each other, dude, fucking high heaven. And I'm like, oh, what do I do? I call my friend, and on an actual landline because we don't have cell phones back then. And he's all, what are they doing? They're ripping each other apart. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, I can see ribs and white meat and like organs and stuff. He's like, oh, that's not good. And basically, he's like, try to separate them. And back then I used to play hockey, so I put my goalie helmet on, everything. I'm all running there. I grab them, I separate them, and both snakes were thrashing around. The males sliced open, the females are sliced open, and I'm like, "Well, do I bring it to the vet?" They're like, "No, you can't, because they're so amped up. If you touch them, it's gonna be 10 times worse." He's all, "Just spray them down with betadine. Don't dilute it. Just the normal, super dark, like dark, iced tea looking thing. Spray it down betadine."
That's what I use.
And they're like, "It'll go in the shed like tomorrow or the day after." And I'm like, "What?" And back then, like, there was no internet. So it's kind of like, "What do you mean?" They're like, "Any catastrophic injuries, they'll almost instantly go in a shed cycle. It's just naturally, that's how they heal." And I'm like, "Oh, well, okay, I don't know." So do it. Then literally 2, 3 days, they both go in blue. And eventually they completely healed. And I didn't take pictures back then because I didn't. But literally you could see ribs, you can see all white meat. There's blood everywhere. And I'm like, "Oh shit." I was like, I think I was what, 15, 16. I was like, "What I do?" I'm like, and eventually they healed, and I started on real small meals the first couple. Then after that, they shed. And down the road, it was crazy because when you looked at the pattern, everything was perfect. Like the only thing was the patterns were offset. So basically, it was maybe like a quarter inch from where they should have matched on the patterns. It was just that, and that was the only thing. It was like, wow, that's crazy. They were literally, because when the female bit the male, he rolled and he almost got disemboweled. Then he turned around, bit her, and she did the same thing. And I was just watching this. I'm like, oh, wow, this is not what I expected. So,
Oh, geez.
so
And what's
All
crazy,
right, so time to reinvest in some hockey gear. Haven't played in a
right?
while.
yep,
Seriously. Yeah, I'm from down south. People don't really play hockey too much now.
No, but they're incredibly resilient.
yeah,
The male I used to breed my first pairing, he as a hatchling had pushed his face literally in half. I'll try to dig up the pictures so we can attach it, and when I went to breed him, you would never known that he had pushed his face.
yeah, it's crazy. Like one of the marks I don't really like. I mean, they look cool, but I try to stay away are super tigers, because I've had, like, when I did the mainland stuff, super tigers are notorious for being pushers. Like nothing, everything, they could have siblings that are 100% legit, exact same setup, and that super tiger would literally smash his face up in like no time. When I produced
Really
my
good to know.
last mainland pied clutch, like I think it was season before last, I had two super tiger pieds where, like, normally, like, you can tell by the usually have that bent tongue or whatever. So they hatch out of the egg. I separate them after they hatch in individual freedom breeder, like the hatching tubs and stuff. And I come back the next day and the face is annihilated. I'm like, "You were literally out of the egg for 12 hours and your face is gone." I'm like, "This is why I don't do super tigers." But I mean, it healed
Yeah.
up fine, but it just, they go into these weird, crazy cycles where they'll push and push, smash it up. Then all of a sudden they'll be like, "Oh, I'm good for 3, 4 months." Then for whatever reason, they do it again. And that,
They're like, oh, that hurt. Let me stop.
yeah. No, I've, like, one of the breedings I did way back when I got back into it in 2012 was, like, I think it was in 2013, 2014. I was shooting for a lavender Motley super tiger. And that was the only, goal of that particular breeding. I got one female, and she turned into be a horrible pusher, to the point where a year later, I call one of my friends. I'm like, "Hey, you want a snake?" And they're like, "What do you mean?" They did retics. I was like, "Hey, I have my lavender Motley super tiger." And they're like, "Isn't that your one holdback from my clutch?" I'm like, "Yeah." I was like, "You can have her. I don't want her." And they're like, "Why?" I'm like, "I can't stand that on again, off again, pushing, smashing your face up. It just, that stuff drives me crazy."
Please take her.
Yeah.
Yep.
I feel that. I had a mainland. I bought it as an orange glow, but ended up turning out to be a purple. And ended up rehoming him, but he was an avid pusher. And I mean, everything. I did small enclosure, big enclosure. I tried basically just about everything, and he'd go through his cycles. He ended up doing better in a 3 foot hefty tub, is where I could get him to stop pushing. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to rehome him, let people know what the issue is, and um, just because I had no breeding intentions, and he was just an animal that my stress would be through the roof every day
Yeah.
because of him. It's unfortunate, but I wanted to ask you. So let's talk about Calatoa size, because I mean, I don't know if you've seen this, but I see a lot of people on the Super Dwarf Retic page that we're all fairly active on, and I see so many people getting into this, thinking that a pure Super Dwarf, and we're talking about Calatoas here. So in your experience, a pure Calatoa what do you think is the expected size range, a realistic size range from hatchling all the way to mature adulthood? And like, what do you consider like an adult? Like, is an adult a breeder, or is an adult whatever
No,
age? Like, I want you
I'd
to
say,
talk about.
in my opinion, I'd say as an adult, you're looking at probably 8+ years. Because if you're talking breeder for males, I mean, if you're trying to crank out that male, he can breed for you theoretically in probably 18 months, maybe a little sooner, give or take. The girls, about 4.5 to 6 years, they'll breed. But I think the big issue is most people getting into it. They're like, hey, so and so said this animal's gonna get X amount of feet. Which, first off, like, I've never ever told anyone any of my animals will get X amount of feet. I'm like, these are the ages of the parents. This is the size, and they're still gonna
Mm-hmm.
grow. So most of my breeders are pretty young. They're probably anywhere from 6 to maybe 8 or 9 years old, at that. So it's still got a couple more years of growing. But the issue is, I think everyone sees their people's breeders as thinking, oh, okay, they're topped out. Not even close, because everyone's like, every first time breeder animal, female obviously, is gonna be much smaller than she's gonna be in another 5, 10 years if they live that long. Because honestly, some people are like cranking these animals out. And they're like, oh, I've bred her 3, 4 years in a row. First off, I'm like, wow, that's impressively stupid in terms of, like, you obviously all you're doing is trying to crank out babies for sale and this and that, because like the
Mm-hmm.
stress on that animal to be breeding nonstop continually, like, especially at that young of an age, like, and I've talked to people and they're like, oh no, they're fine. I'm like, they're fine until they're not. And if you actually care about the animal, like, none of my stuff, a lot of people like, oh, you can start cycling them by food. Like, all my stuff, like, I've told people, I was like, you can watch their behaviors. And a lot of the girls, you raise them up, they're normal. Then all of a sudden, when they start getting ready to breed, they get crazy food driven, and they'll start
Mm-hmm.
being super bitey. Like, say the normal meal lasts somewhere 4 or 5 days, 6 days, they don't care. When they start getting ready to breed, like 3, 4 days later, they're striking. You're like, what the hell? They're not aggressive. They're just, their body is telling them, hey, I need the calories, which is fine. But I don't purposely say, hey, at this day on this month, I'm gonna start slamming them with food. Like, I have my breedings listed for the whole year, like years ahead, but it's like I'm not pushing anything. It's like, okay, here's my list of animals I want to breed. If they go, great. If they don't, but everyone's on the same cycle until they get super food driven, then I'll bump it up. Like, I don't do bigger meals. I just do more frequent. But yes, I mean,
That's
Okay.
a lot of the Calatoas I think are going to probably, realistically, I'd say you're looking at anywhere from 8 foot, probably about 12. The males on the smaller end, females on the bigger, especially the way people are feeding them. Because I've told people, I was like, these are pretty arboreal. I mean, if you look at, say, green tree pythons, I'm like, they eat, then they take forever to poop. And all these people are like, no, my stuff poops in 3 or 4 days. What are you keeping it? Oh, I have a 90-degree hotspot or 95. I'm like, oh my God, I'm surprised that thing's not dead. It's like, of course they're going to pass the food. And, if you have it super warm, they're not going to, retain any of the nutrients from it, but they will pass it extremely fast and be hungry again, because you're basically cooking that animal. So I was like, even with my incubation now, like when I first started mainlands, and even when I started doing the SD stuff, I used to incubate at 88, 89 ish. Now I do 86 and a half, give or take, and it takes longer, but all the animals come out perfectly fine. They look, they're not as wiry and crazy as like when I had them at higher temps. Those hatchlings come out super spastic, like crazy, like, a garter snake, or
Mm-hmm.
all like, now a lot of them are super mellow. I'm not sure if it's a temperature thing, but they're not as crazy. And I think a lot of it is like everyone's push to get, to breed is going to negatively affect size down the road, where people are like, oh, this animal is huge. Yeah, but you can tell it's not natural, because the majority of retics, unfortunately, are completely and totally pinheaded. Like most
yeah.
retics, if you ever see like wild pictures or even old school
Their necks are like
kids from the
this.
day, yeah, they have huge, massive heads compared to the rest of like normal pythons, which is one of the distinct things back in the day when I was a kid. You see a big retic at the zoo that would have this giant head, and you're like, wow, that's the craziest thing ever. But now everyone's retic super pinheaded. You're like, dude, that head looks like it should be
Mm-hmm.
on a 4 foot animal, but that thing's like 12 feet. Oh, I'm feeding it like 5 pound rabbits. You're like, what the hell? And unfortunately, I guarantee you the SD world is going to go the same way, because the mainland guys, unfortunately, that haven't switched or won't switch, they have two options, and you see it every single day. Is you have the guys that are getting into it because they know, hey, the SD is probably the future for retakes.
That's where the market's going.
Yeah, but then you see the other mainland guys like, hey, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to sling a bunch of bullshit and say, I have a really small mainland female that's, is ST adjacent. It's pretty similar. No,
Oh,
oh my God.
jeez, that's my favorite.
You see these
If you
breeders.
selectively breed mainlands and you
Yeah.
like it's crazy to think that you can selectively breed a mainland through getting smaller mainlands that you're manipulating through giving it no food, that it's
But
going to be smaller than a super dwarf.
that, and you have these people saying, this is the first clutch. So you bypass evolution in one breeding, and that clutch is not even adult size yet. You're saying they're going to be comparable to SD, which is just mind boggling. It just,
Yeah.
yeah.
People don't realize it took thousands of years for evolution to take place for these Calatoas to end up being 8 to 12 foot animals.
Yep.
And I mean, and I would even venture to say on the islands, they're probably smaller because they literally have even more scarce food and everything. But because we're here in captivity and because we don't want to deal with a psychopath animal, right? Like, we don't want to deal with an animal that's hungry 24/7. We're feeding them a little bit more often and maybe a little bit bigger food than what they're getting. And so in captivity, we are seeing them get a little bit bigger. But I'm glad that you mentioned that 8 to 12 foot for female range because I stopped getting into these arguments online because I just realized like a year and a half ago, just
I don't even bother for it because
you can't change someone's mind on the internet. And I had one dude try to tell me that he bought an animal for so and so, and because it's a pure male Calatoa, it's gonna get max at 6 foot. And I was like, how do you know that? Like, number one, 6 foot, like a 6 foot retic curled up is like my hand.
Yep.
Like it's like, yeah. So yeah, I think realistic expectations of what you should expect with a Calatoa. I kind of agree with you, Eric. I think that at 8 to 10 years old, your female is going to be around the 8 foot mark or pushing more to the 10. You saying 12, I was surprised to hear you that. I've seen pictures of 12-foot Calatoas, and I know that they're out there. But yeah, I think on the bigger end, you're looking in between 10, 11, and then some can definitely, some outliers.
They're definitely going to have, we definitely have some that are much bigger or smaller than others, but at the same time, it's like, I think the issue we'll run into, a lot of people that are going to get them, especially people switching from mainland to ST stuff, they still have that mainland mentality in terms of feeding, which is kind of like a catch-22. It's like, we're not going to have competition for breeders because their shit's not going to breed. It's just way obese. But at the same time, it's bad for the animal. And the thing is, for all the legitimate new people getting into it that see some, even if it is a legitimate Calatoa, that thing looks like it's on his deathbed where it looks like it's rolling along because it's so overfed. And like some of the groups, you'll see people like, oh, I'm feeding this like every 5 or 7 days. I'm like, I mean, my hatchling, I feed about probably every 7 to 10 days. Sometimes my schedule is weird and I totally forget. And I'm like, oh, I've gone 2 weeks. They're perfectly fine. They're not dying. And it's weird, honestly, because my pure stuff, all the like ST crosses, the morphs and stuff, will literally start pushing and get super food aggressive. The pures, for whatever reason, when I accidentally don't feed them, they're same, super chill, mellow. They don't push. They just hang out and they're like, yo, when are you gonna feed me? Whereas whatever cross I have,
that survival
they
mentality.
go absolutely crazy where they're like, feed me. And the pure's like, he went a week. He forgot about us. But like, they're super chill still.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I hatched that F1 clutch in February, and it didn't matter how long I went without feeding them. I can open the tub and put my hand there, and the first thing they want to do is just smell me or hide. Like I literally, most of them, I had to put the food in front of their face and do this for them to be like, oh, like food, right?
Yeah. Most of my peers, historically, probably been better feeders than any of the crosses I've done. They've taken frozen thawed from the get go. I don't need to like switch live to frozen and all that stuff. Like all my Calatoas, knock on wood. I don't know if it's just my luck or they're very, very eager to eat and like they don't have issues with that at all. Whereas I've had some of my crosses where I've gone 2 months, 3 months where like I don't assist feed, like I'll literally free stuff because in my mentality, if you're that genetically inferior, you don't know what food is. I don't want to pass that on to a customer down the road. So it's one of those things where, so it is what it is.
That was a funny way of wording that. You don't know what food is. But yeah, I tell people I had one problematic baby for my the F1 Calatoa clutch. And what I mean by problematic is that it refused its first 3 meals only. Like 3 meals is nothing. Like it literally was in a span of 2 weeks after it shed, and it was no big deal. What's a range that you can expect for a male? Is that in the same 8 to 12 foot range?
No, I mean, it depends because like I think most of us in general, in terms of like what we keep, a lot of it is geared toward breeding. So our feeding cycles kind of reflect that. Where we all know like you don't need a big male to be a successful breeder. And in terms of some people hedge their bets where like, oh, if this guy is once he's mature, he might go crazy. I mean, it's a possibility. It probably won't happen, but at the same time, it's like if I can have a nice, lean, small male that would do the same exact job as a big male, that the big male might not be as energetic, like breeding purpose wise, and in terms of like percentages and getting successful locks and clutches, I'd err on the side of caution is keep them smaller. Not that I'm starving
Mhm.
them, but at the same time, it's like that Calatoa male, the one I sent you the picture of. He's what is he? I think a 2017. I think I
Which
can't
one are you
remember
referring to? That way I
the
can pop this up on the
the
video for the people
PK
that are
male
watching.
from Shannon Ropey. He's
Okay.
super small. He's probably I can look at my record, but I think he's a 2017. I think, and he's probably
He
legit. He's probably 5, maybe 5.5 feet. He's on medium
yeah,
Yeah,
rats.
he looks tiny.
He's on medium
he
rats, and he's sired. Let's see here. One. He's sired 3 clutches for me so far, and he's
we're
perfectly
gonna
fine. Like he's like, I'm sure if I mean, if I offered him like a jumbo rat every week, he'd obviously take it without any hesitation. But do I need to?
no, a jumbo rat looks, yeah. I mean, I'm sure a jumbo rat leaves a big lump in him. For those of you that are watching, we're gonna have this thumbnail. We'll have him pulled up here for you guys to see. He's an awesome looking animal. Has that typical TK, zigzag pattern. Has those beautiful yellows and the silver side flames that come up. And yeah, he's an exceptional looking Calatoa. I mean, that's what you want to. I mean, I'm interested if you can later confirm what year he is. I mean, but
Yeah,
even if he's a 2017, that's a good size. What you want to
And
see out of a male Calatoa.
is he sitting in an FB70?
no, SB40.
FB40.
Wait,
Okay.
is it 40?
So even
Jeez,
smaller.
Wait, no, I'm trying. Yeah, SB40. Yeah,
Okay.
that's awesome. So
most of my
let
males in general, or I've had a great success with them being way smaller. My only big concern is like last season, I did a breeding loan with Andrea Acevedo with his 75% Calatoa Madu Phantom Sun Tiger head Henry. And that male is probably, I'd say maybe 7 feet, give or take.
Mhm.
And I ran it to my 62.5% Reed Marble Platinum head Henry. And she's a legit 14, like she can take 8 pound rabbits, 9 pound rabbits, no problem. But I mean,
nice.
still, you got the job done. It's one of those things where it, it's more manageable, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know. I've only tried it twice where I've ran males that were much bigger than females, and they were never successful. Whether the females freak out or the males just get too aggro on a tiny little girl, I don't know. But like most of the time, my males are considerably smaller than my breeder females.
Now, a question I have for you is, what if you have a female that's staying smaller, like reaches that 4.5, 5 year mark, still staying almost almost the size of that male TK that we were just pulling up?
Okay.
You raise it a few more years before you try anything, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't like I said, I don't push anything. Like I have one girl right now. It's kind of funny because like she has a lineage. She's a 37.5% SD Calatoa locality Mochino Pasadena girl, right? From
Hmm.
was it? I think it's February 2014. I've tried 5 years in a row to breed her, nothing, and she's probably a legitimate 15, 16 foot animal. She's massive. Like she'll take 12 pound rabbits, but
Oh,
like and like
where do you
I got
find those?
yeah. People see it and they're like, wait, I thought you only had one mainland. I'm like, no, she's FT. They're like, wait, like, she's huge. But at the end of the day, it's like I've tried everything to breed her. She, like I said, 5.5 years. Like she's had locks before with my purple snow male for a couple years. Would never ovulated, never cycled. So, but it's kind of like I'd wait and just kind of like I'm not trying to like I want her to go just because my luck. I'll sell her, then she'll prove it head Henry for someone. So it's
I was
basically
gonna
Yeah.
she's my
say,
right now.
send her to me to the ambient world and let me try the ambient magic that's working so
But
well
yeah,
for me.
I mean, if for your to answer your question, Nathan, yeah, I'd just wait. I mean, it's one of
Yeah.
those things
I
where,
mean,
like,
that's been my thing. Like, I'm not gonna push anything.
yeah,
Uh, I have other snakes I can run if I really do feel like breeding, and I'm only gonna breed if it feels right and everything's
yeah.
going
And
right.
that, honestly, like, I tell people, because, some people are always like, oh, I got to breed, I got to breed. It's like, that extra year is not going to hurt you. It's literally going to help you because if she's more mature,
You'll save that animal
you'll save that
some
animal.
years.
And honestly, like, people don't see it this way, but in terms of longevity of breeding, you're only helping the situation. Because if you rush it,
Yeah.
you're literally going to shorten her productivity and possibly her life for what? For one clutch, her first, that might not even be that great to begin with because she's too small or too this or too that. That extra year is just, it's only going to
Yeah.
benefit you and the snake.
And that kind of brings me back to something you were talking about earlier when you're saying, you'll see people cycling a female and running her 2, 3, 4 seasons, whatever, in a row. And cool, you're producing all these animals, but what do you think realistically is something the animal can healthily take?
I mean, ideally on mine, like I said, I don't really push anything to go, but if I for the ones that have gone like back to back, I'll give them a year or two off.
Hmm.
Like I had the
Yeah.
one clutch where the 75% Calatoa 12.5 gent double head snail grow. She produced a clutch for me December 2020. And before that, she didn't breed for 3.5 years. Like she produced my first ever snow, then she produced my purple GC snows, and that was back to back years. Then she had 3.5 years off for whatever reason. And the whole time, like I just feel like, okay, well, she's not going, okay, whatever. And just, it is what it is. Maybe I could have pushed it, but why? It's just one.
So your philosophy is only pair if really the female is showing signs of wanting to
Yeah.
breed.
Like I don't like I'm not slam like I know some people they're like, hey, every whatever August or beginning of September, I'm slamming everything with food nonstop, regardless if they're ready to go.
Hmm.
I'm like, yeah, I don't do that. To me personally, like back when I was running like higher temps, like when I was in Arizona and I tried Ambien for a little, like they'd process the food and this and that, but for the ones that go, great, but a lot of times the clutches aren't the best. And at the end of the day, if you look at the numbers in terms of all the extra expenditures on food, cleaning, this and that, compared to, hey, I'm just gonna wait and let it happen naturally. If she goes, she goes. You're like the clutches
Hmm.
are better, the babies are more viable. It's like if you're in it for quality, there's a big difference between mass producing for like say if you're wholesaling stuff, you're like you don't really care. But if you're like I'm doing 2 or 3 breedings every like a year, if that max, then why push it? Like give her that
Yeah.
extra year to get, the lean muscle mass, to get more follicles, to get, bigger and healthier.
Yeah, and there's a lot that goes into that besides cleaning and feeding.
Yeah,
You're
exactly.
constantly exercising your snakes, making sure that their body tone's up, and
Yeah,
I'm sure you have a visual standard of what you want their muscle tone to look like.
exactly.
I can speak to like so, and I know this is talking about another locality, but my Kayuwadi, like she just laid her first clutch at 4.5 years old. But I did try getting her to go a year prior, and I started hitting her heavier with food and realized that she wasn't going, and so I pumped her off and slowed her down big time with food, and was just like, you know what, I'm not going to force her into doing this. I'm just going to give her another year. And then come when I switch her into the garage, I started noticing when I put her in the garage food. I mean, I've had her since she was 3 4 months old, and she's never ever bitten a hook and wrapped it, and she did that like 2 times, and I was like, all right, like let's start increasing food and doing that. And I mean, just from waiting that year and holding off, she laid 25 perfect eggs.
Yep. I think
Yeah, so
honestly, like for most people, you don't need to food cycle them. Like if you pay attention to your animals and you actually, know your animals, 100% they will give you signs of, hey, I'm ready to start eating more because I'm getting ready to build. Because I don't think I've ever had any girl where I was like, oh, I have a surprise clutch. And like every girl, like their behavior changes if you pay attention to each and every animal. Because like I have siblings, like the two purple GC Snell girls, like they're all super calm and mellow, but when they start building, they get stupid food driven. Where I have them in visions right now, and it's a 4 stack, so the top cage is probably I don't know 6 foot, give or take, a little over. And last year when she was breeding, she's like 10 feet. She flew out of that cage completely and flopped on the ground. I'm like, okay, she wants to eat. It's just one of those things where it's very noticeable signs of them being like, okay, I want more calories in because I need the calories right now. And
and
if you pay
I don't know
attention to that, you shouldn't have any problems.
I don't know if you have the same experience, but all of my females that I've noticed when they start to get into that breeding mood, anytime I touch them with a hook or I go to grab them, they're always
They
just they're
dump.
more flinchy. They're
Yeah.
more flinchy. They're sensitive. They just don't want to be touched. And that's another big sign for me that I noticed with my wild caught Calatoa and my Coyote. When they cycle, like, and I put my and I use polycarbonate hooks, so they're not even like metal and cold. So they're room temperature, and as soon as you touch them with anything, they're just like whoa, like their
Yep.
behavior changes completely. They're a little bit more spastic. They're definitely more food driven. So yeah, those are all extremely good points of just yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, and I think we talked about this in one of our previous episodes, but like if you just spend enough time with your animals and observe them, and you're in your snake room every day, you're going to be able to tell when you have an animal that's ready to breed because the behavior change is pretty drastic.
Absolutely.
I think we wouldn't be doing our listeners any justice if we didn't like go over this in more detail. I know we talked a little bit about feeding, but can you tell us for your Calatoa specifically, your hatchlings all the way to your adults? I get questions all the time about like how often they feed, the size that they feed, the lumps that they leave. Like, can you tell us with your Calatoa specifically what your feeding regiment's like all the way from like hatchling and to your adults that are 2013s 9 years old?
Yeah. Pretty much. I start them off on mice fuzzies, frozen thawed. Most of them, I don't really have issues with them not taking frozen thawed. And usually for the first about 4 or 5 meals, I'll try to do it every 4 or 5 days. Once I know they're on food and like food's not an issue in terms of they knowing what to do with it, I'll bump it back about every 7 to 10 days for the first year. At that point, at a year old, I'm probably I usually switch them to over to rats. Usually either a larger rat pinky or a smaller rat fuzzy, depending on the particular animal. And at that point, from a year to two, usually about every 7 to 10 days. Then, depending on when they actually switch to pups, I think I've had some of my Calatoas at about a year and a half that stayed on the mice fuzzies just because either they were smaller or they were fine with it. Like I said, most of mine, even though when I do the extended meals, like after the first 6 months, whatever, they're not food driven, they're not aggressive, and I take them out. They're all super chill. I've had people that got animals from me. They're like, "This thing's not biting." I'm like, "No, it's super cool." And it's one of those things where some animals I've had to feed more often just because like individual, traits where they're like, they need to eat. So you're like, okay, well, your schedule's gonna be a little different from everyone else's. But let's say like that male I have right now, that one from Shannon, he gets a medium rat about every 2 weeks, give or take. The my breeder females right now, non-breeding season is usually one jumbo rat every anywhere from 10 to 14 days. Once they start getting ready and they're starting to get more food, driven, I would bump it up to usually about once every 7 days. Sometimes I got to do it more just because like I've had times where last season the one of the Leonard girls was knocking all her teeth out because on the lips on the top of the vision cage she'd bite and like she does this thing where she'll bite the bottom lip and her mouth is open and does like a Pac-Man all over and I could literally hear the crunching. I'm like, I really don't want to have to pin you down and rip out all your broken teeth. So I was literally feeding her like I think every 5 days for about 4 or 5 meals for her to be like, okay, now I'm good. It's like I said, a lot of it's individual where you have a generalized plan for most animals. It works great for a majority of them, but then you'll have that
Mhm.
one off where that animal, it's just you got to be very particular about that animal because either the food drive is super high or it just needs a massive amount of calories nonstop for X amount of weeks before it goes, okay, now I'm cool again.
Yeah. Yeah, I have my wild caught. I will like once she lays, I feed her jumbo rats for like the next 3 to 4 months, and when her food response starts to get intense, I switch her over to rabbits just because I have a local
Okay.
source, and the local source is I can get them way cheaper than what a jumbo rat. I can get them at $2.25 a pound.
Nice.
And so what I've done with some of my pure localities that I have, whether it's Calatoa or not, I'll give them smaller meals every 2 weeks or so. But then sometimes I like to switch it up, and I'll give them a really big meal that leaves a big month, like once a month.
Okay.
And I like the result that I've seen with that because I feel like that actually curbs their feeding response for a longer period of time. Um, and what's crazy is I keep my animals in ambient. So like it ranges from 81 to 84 degrees. they don't have a hot spot, and sometimes it takes them 7 days to craft. Sometimes it takes them literally like 2 days. It's the weirdest thing. But it'll fluctuate. But yeah, no, I like your feeding regimen in the sense of your what I love what you do is you pay attention to your snake's behaviors, and that dictates how much you're going to feed them, right?
Yep. Yeah, because I mean, I used to do that thing where, like, a lot of people are like, oh, they're set, like, every Wednesday or Friday or whatever your particular schedule, and do that. Then after a while, like, if you have one or two snakes or three or four, that's fine. But when you're talking about you got like 40, 50, 60 animals, that gets super pricey. Then it gets to the point where, like, literally you're feeding or cleaning poop nonstop. Then when you realize it's not benefiting you and the snake's not burning off all the extra calories, you'll start seeing those chunkier snakes, and you're like, okay, well, I'm causing an issue that I can either, prevent now and start minimizing it by cutting it way back and doing what I need to adjust, or you're going to end up with a bunch of snakes that won't breed for you, you know? I think a lot of it too, like even for a while, like out here, I think I was doing pigs every so often because I had a pig guy out here. Then I don't have a pig guy now. Eventually, I'd like to do birds. Like once I get everything, do quail or this or that, just change it up.
I love the poultry stuff. I mean chicken, quail, and my snakes. As a matter of fact, I've had a handful of snakes where I give them 5, 6, chickens or quail in a row, and they get stubborn with the rats that I feed them. They like think about it, and I'm like, no, like no, you're not. We're not doing this right now. But yeah, the snakes love the chicken and quail. And right now with how crazy expensive rats are, I've been feeding a lot more chicken and quail because I get the same size for a fraction of the price that you're getting rats at.
Nice. Yeah, the one thing I have noticed, like all the ST girls, they absolutely go crazy for pigs. Because I was getting these
Oh
like
yeah,
half-pound, three-quarter-pound stuff, and
yeah.
they would go absolutely crazy for it. Like once you start, because I defrost it in an adjacent bathroom, and you smell it in the room, and everyone just gets switched on. And like the way they hit those pigs are 10 times harder than they've ever hit any other rats when they get fed rats or whatever. But yeah, the pigs, like they absolutely love the pigs for sure.
I do pigs when I'm cycling up to breed. Like when I notice that change of behavior and they're wanting more food, I use the pigs just because they're much higher in calcium content.
Yep.
And and theoretically, that's calcium is what the eggshell is highly based off of, and so I do that. And I did that the second year my wild caught Calatoa went, and I noticed that her eggs were a lot more durable and
Nice.
not as soft. That first year that I broke apart those eggs, they were super delicate, and then I cycled her with pigs the next year, and they were normal, just easy to pull off.
So rounding this out, Eric, I kind of want to go into some of these pictures that you sent over to Lucas of
Okay.
the different lines you have here, and just go over some of your favorite features, maybe size, pattern, whatever it
Okay.
may be about these different Kalatoas that you have.
Okay.
So let's start off with that TK. The Lucas, you're gonna have to give more detail.
Yeah, so I have it here in front of me. So I mentioned this earlier on, and we'll have this up for people to see. But this is a beautiful TK female. If you look at like the rest of the pictures that will show up, this is a more brown individual that has a lot more of the orange tones. She has rosettes, those white rosettes that seem to be a little bit more spaced out. She has that typical jigsaw pattern along the line, and what I mean by that is like there's almost these perfect triangular reticulated diamonds. Think of a diamond. Here I am going to go make shapes again. So you have a diamond, right? And then cut it in half and then like stagger them. Nathan, stop laughing at me.
Lucas really likes to draw shapes with his fingers on
I don't
the
know.
show.
I'm trying to do a diamond, but like the diamond's like this instead of
They're
being
all
perfectly.
set, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, talk about her a bit. And in terms of like what your look is, what your favorite look is compared to the other ones that we'll show. What are your thoughts about her?
Like that male and her down the road, I'd love to try to make that and make it more like exaggerated, more extreme where that goes up, because a lot of that offset triangular patterns you're talking about is like the last third of her. I'd love to have that where it was more on her. Like I think that thing would look crazy if that was like say half her length of her body, where the dorsal patterns all that triangular, offset pattern all the way up. I think would look amazing. Like with her and with that male, eventually that's like probably because I'm not doing any pure breeding this year. I'll probably be shooting for those two to pair up next season, and that'll be what I'm going for, to try to like make that, exaggerate that pattern as much as I can, and see if it, if it gets any longer or like thicker, because they both have that really nice like 2 scale wide, the black outline on it, which is really cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and what's crazy is that a lot of people tend to generalize Calatoas as not having, like, the super dwarf localities in general don't have a lot of the thicker blacks, don't have a lot of like that bold color. But this TK female that we're looking at right here, when you get to her midsection and you see the outline of those jagged, triangular diamond patterns, she's got plenty of bold black.
Yep.
I think that she would actually. So I know platinum pulls away a lot of that like black and it things it out.
Mm-hmm.
Feel like taking platinum to this female would actually would be really good, because it would keep a lot of some of that like black detail that gets stripped away from platinums. And so that way you could get a little bit more of the black patterning in outline in a platinum. But yeah, she's awesome.
That's who you're taking the ocelot to eventually?
No, right now I have a pure SD girl that it has that really thick black pattern.
Okay.
And she's 6.5 years old. She produced that my 84.375 SD, the Anri Marble Platinum Posset Purple, is from this past season. So basically, I'm gonna run him to her just because she has a really thick black outline, kind of like that TK girl. And with the ocelot being very like, that contrast is amazing on
Just
him, and with
bold.
that thickness, I want to see if hopefully it translates silver well.
Yeah.
And is she Leonard or wild caught?
Her parents were just 2003 imports. So,
Okay.
and the thing is,
Just a
like,
pure super dwarf.
yeah, she's a pure super dwarf. I have 3 from that clutch from Brian's Samala Kamala, depending on how you say his last name. And all 3 of
Mhm.
those girls are smaller than any of my locality labeled stuff.
Send me a picture that we could use while we're talking about this, so that I could also pull up this pure super dwarf girl. I think it'd be cool for people to see the pure super dwarf that's not uh that's not labeled Calatoa, just to give a little comparison.
Okay.
Because I mean, what's going to be awesome is that as we start to show more of these animals, on the video, for those of you that are watching on YouTube, you'll just see that, like, there's a lot that goes to show that, like, yes, you want to have this typical look for a Calatoa. Like, clearly, if it looks like a Slayer and not a Calatoa, you could be pretty damn sure it's not a Calatoa, right?
Yeah.
But like, there's just a vast difference. I want to go to the next one, the Leonard girl.
Okay.
And we've talked about her and pulled her up, but if I had to pick a favorite out of all of your Calatoas,
The one with
this
the
is
open
my
back.
girl. This is the one with the open back.
Garrett loves her. That's Garrett's
If
favorite every
you
time he sees her.
if you were in a position where you know how you said, like, you're either gonna like boom or bust in terms of like how you keep your animals, it's gonna make or
Uh-huh.
break it. Like, if there's any animal, if you were to go back overseas and start, defending our country, or you're to go do whatever, and you want to do permanent breeding loans, this would be the female that I'm like, send to me. Like, don't send
She's
it to
gorgeous.
anybody.
When she fires up, it's absolutely just mind blowing. Like, there's times I'll go in the room at night and I'm like, it just like, even my wife's not really a big snake person. She like likes them more and more and stuff, but she's like, wow, that thing is like literally pure like silver and black. It's just
Mhm.
ridiculous how much she fires up.
So this girl's a 2015 Barry Leonard. I want to get one of his bloodlines. I'm almost like peaked out of what I want to work with Calatoa, but I do want to get the Leonard bloodline, and hopefully an animal from this girl specifically. If you guys that are looking, you can see it has a wide open back, doesn't have that triangular look like the Calatoa does. It's almost like if there was some form of like Calatoa that could potentially be like as close to genetic stripey as you can with a
Mhm.
Calatoa. It just has that wide open pattern. And then what I love about her side flames, that silver, when my girl fires up, my wild cock girl, her side flames are exactly the same. And she has a high saddle count, just like my wild cock does. You
Nice.
can see the whites that are just in there over and over again. And what I love about her is the shape of her head has that nice Calatoa triangular
Yeah.
look to her that you
Very
see.
spearheaded.
Yeah.
Not as wide as that TK girl for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I were to choose a line of Calatoas, sorry, because I'm late to the game, I only have cross stuff right now. I think it would be some of the Leonard stuff, especially if it could be
Yeah.
from this girl.
It's weird to me because like I know that clutch was a big clutch when he sold it, and like I have no idea. Like I've tried to find other people, and no one's ever said anything. And like I know, obviously, I have my two girls, and God, I wish I would have just messaged them and be like, "Hey, I'll buy the whole clutch from you" back then. But
Right.
I don't, because I know like even after he sold the clutch, someone on the nation ended up picking up the parents, and like that was years and years. Like that was around 2015 when that happened. But yeah, I have no idea what ever happened to siblings or the parents or whatnot.
So,
That's unfortunate. Yeah, I have a 4.5-year-old girl from Daniel Solis, and
Okay,
neither one of us could figure out, where half the clutch is
yeah,
right now.
so you said that original TK girl that we first started talking about was about 8 feet.
but yeah, 8.5 or so. Yeah,
How big is this? The first 2015, because we're going to show a second 2015 Barry Leonard girl that he has that looks completely different. But the one that we're talking about now with the open back pattern,
he's
how
probably
big is
about
she?
9.5, probably about 9.5, 10 feet, give or take.
Okay, that's about the size of my wild caught. Your girl looks a little bit thicker than well. I mean, your girl just had a meal. I can see that she has a meal in her belly right there. Um, yeah, I mean, in terms of size, looks pretty similar to mine. All right, so now the third one in the picture. Nathan, do you have it up?
Yep, I have it.
Go ahead and describe that Barry Leonard line, especially compared to the other one.
I mean, I'd say as far as the saddles and everything go, just the reticulated pattern, it's a lot more similar to what you see with the TK line. You not as much of the alternating zigzag pattern that you got on that TK girl, but I'd say quite a bit more silver.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I keep referencing my adult Calatoa, but if I had to pick any of your Calatoas that had the same pattern as mine, it would be that one right there. It's like there's almost like a zigzag look, but it's not so much that perfect, diamond, stagger
yeah,
type of look. And
Nor is
she
there the wide open back.
exactly, but she also has a good saddle or a good rosette count on the side that I like a lot. Um, and some of them are elongated as well. How big is she? She looks pretty small.
she's probably about a foot smaller than sister, give or take. Same
Oh, so
food
that's a
schedule,
direct
everything.
sister?
Yeah, they're same clutch.
Shut up.
Yeah,
Wow.
Just goes to show you variability just within the clutch can be
Dude, that
crazy.
is so cool. Because I guarantee you, if you like anybody who's like just new into Superdwarfs and like loves Kalatoas, like if they saw that animal, they'd be like, "That's not a Kalatoa," right? Because it's super wide open back pattern, and they're like, Kalatoas don't look like that. But then if they were to see a literal sibling, they'd be like, "That's a Kalatoa."
and they were
So
from the same clutch. So yeah,
right, that's what I'm saying. Like, yeah, the variability is phenomenal. That's pretty cool. All right, that next one, your wild caught male that we're gonna have pulled up here is probably my favorite male that you have.
yeah.
He's got some cool greens.
I wish he would have sired at least one clutch because everyone that saw him, they're like, he's Henry, right? I'm like, I don't know,
Was
and I
that
bred it.
was that the dud?
Yeah,
Tell I
yeah.
don't
7 clutches later, not a one viable clutch. I'm like, okay, you know what? I've tried. Everyone's like, wait, what do you mean you tried 7 times? Yeah, he like missed a mark 7 different times, and most of those girls slugged out. I think out of the 7, I had 3 Partho clutches. None of them ever survived. So at that point, I was like, okay, I got to stop trying you. And I was like, the
did
only
you
way I'm
ever
gonna stop is if I get rid
did
of
you
you.
did you ever try him in ambient or did you always have him on a
Yep.
gradient?
No, I tried them on ambient and switched it up and all kinds of things. Because when I was in Arizona, I did ambient for like 2 seasons. Like before, I did the normal, the under tank. Then I switched to ambient. Did the breedings with him. Because every year when I had him, I would switch out different girls because I was like, I don't know if most of the times when he was breeding initially, those clutches were first time girls. So I didn't know if it was a girl issue or it was a him issue. But year after year, I was like, okay. Then I started breeding him to like proving like that. I bred him to the TK girl, and she parthoed, and there was babies that make it. But at that point, she'd already been a seasoned breeder, so I know it wasn't her. Then I bred him to the smaller Leonard grow, and she's Partho, and none of those made it. So
Man.
then even
He's-
like my other 3 like ST that aren't like locality labeled, I bred him to 2 of those grows, and one didn't go. The other one ended up slugging out. So I was like, okay, I'm done, dude. And I was like 7, like I think that was over a span of about 5 years for those 7 clutches, give or take. I was like, okay, I'm done. I got to stop using.
But I understand why you persevered that long. I
Oh,
mean,
he's
he is
beautiful.
almost the perfect mix of that TK girl and the Barry Leonard.
Yeah, that
He-
silver on him and that the green hues are just absolutely insane. That's why
so
everyone's like, he says it's a good snake. Are you sure? I'm like, 7 breeding says I'm sure. So
Yeah.
if I'm not wrong, he looks about 7 feet, 7.5 feet.
no, he was smaller than that. He's probably when I sent him to Garrett, he was probably 6.5 of that, and probably not even that.
Okay.
For a
So
long time, I had him in a V70 because I put him in a 4x2, the Vision 400s, and he was a super spastic. Where when I put him back in the V70s, he's cool. Like I try to pull him out of the V70s or not the V400s, and he'd be flailing around, musking, just going crazy. But then when I put him in the V70s and I pull him out, it was super chill. I'm like, oh, okay, well, you hate big cages, so.
what do you think the super doors? Because this snake looks very silver, but also green. So, what do you think the super dwarf king would label this? A silver phase or a green phase?
Probably somewhere in between. It'd be some new hybrid. I call it blue
Yeah.
phase.
The blue phase.
That's what I'm saying. It's that perfect mashup. So I understand the 7 year or the 7 breeding trial that he was put through.
All right, let's go on to the next male. The next male, the TK line Calatoa from Shannon Roki.
Yep.
Is that how you say her last name?
I hope so.
I hope
I
so
think
too.
so.
I stumbled across her and I learned about her like a year ago, but was kind of mind blown for how long that she's been producing Calatoas for.
Yeah, she's been at it for a while. She was probably producing it before a lot of people because she just got
Yeah. So this girl definitely again. So I mean, this guy, he's again just your high yellow TK type of animal with the jagged spearheaded. So like I said, when we talked about like the lineages out there in Calatoa, there's only really one that you can like look at and know almost for certain.
Yep.
If it's like, and that's the TK line. It's got that triangular jagged pattern that looks really freaking awesome. The silver on the inside, and I bet when he fires up, I bet his yellow is almost highlighted yellow,
he's
right?
super bright, and the contrast is amazing. That's why down the road I want to do the 2 TKs together, hopefully next season.
He looks a lot like my TK male. I would say that yours probably have better contrast in terms of like that darker color with the silver, but I just can imagine like my TK silvered up. He's like this pastel yellow, and then everything else is silver, and I could imagine that he would look pretty similar. Oh man, great looking animal. And then the last one that you sent is that beautiful wild caught female that is like striped out pretty decently, but it's not a clean stripe.
And some of the saddles are even open between that stripe, which
Right.
are kind of cool.
What I like about this one is oftentimes in Calatoa, like one of their defining features, I know Garrett loves to talk about this feature a lot too, is the black dorsal pinstripe that goes from the neck down to the body.
Yep.
This is a really good example of like a little bit down from the neck, you'll see this black line, and it'll just start going down the body. It's obviously not a perfect black line; it'll start to break up, but it has that awesome just black line that goes into the mid body, and then it continues down a little bit more. And then usually with all Calatoas, towards the back end, it kind of opens up a little bit. But that's a female, man, and she's tiny. That looks like it's only one of those 20 quart tubs that you have her in, or 27
gallon. Yeah, she's
or
probably
27 gallon. Yeah.
She's always been small, even after breeding. She's like, I think the first time I bred her with my snow, and it was in the V70 tub.
One thing I like about her is how thin all of the striping is with the black through maybe her first fourth, and then it starts really expanding and getting a little bit thicker through there.
Yeah, and what and I, the reason why again we both agreed on having you on for the Calatoa segment was because I we knew the diversity of Calatoas that you're working with, and I really wanted people to see and be open minded. If you have a reputable breeder that can provide you information on the Calatoas that they have, but it doesn't look like your classic TK Calatoa, like that's not, this last episode 7, when we just talked about like how to buy a superdwarf and locality Retic, we talked about red flags. Like, just because it doesn't have the perfect stereotypic look of a Calatoa doesn't mean that it 100% is not, because that Barry Leonard animal is a perfect example. And and I mean, even that wild caught male that didn't breed for you, that you sent over to Garrett, beautiful Calatoa. But I mean, if you
The
look at it with
patterns
the
not
color,
like
yeah, when you look at,
indicative of Calatoas.
yeah, exactly. So it's just, there's such a wide range of color, pattern, variety, and size. Like, these are all, you know, a lot of them are adults in terms of the year that they were produced. But just like goes to show that size, pattern, color, they can vary even within a specific locality. And I mean, Daniel Solis did a great job with having that picture side by side of two different Kalatoas on Calatoa Island
Yep,
that look completely different from each other. And that was only from two sections of an island that probably has 5 to 6 different areas where you can find Kalatoas.
absolutely. I think that the big thing too right now, because everyone's trying to get wild caught blood into their Calatoa breedings, which is a great thing, but at the same time, it's gonna be kind of hard for new people to come in saying, "I want a Calatoa." Then someone shows them this, like that's like you said, oh, it doesn't look like the classic. Well, yeah, because that's like literally not necessarily fresh blood, but like new blood being mixed in. So it's going to kind of change the normal things that we think
Yeah,
of Calatoa. So everyone has
yeah,
to be cognizant of that and say, okay, if it's like a wild caught to a established line or whatever, you can have a lot of variation. Like the Leonard girls, they're literally from the same clutch and look 100% night and day different. You
yeah.
know,
I mean,
Yeah.
so my first clutch, it was an F1 clutch from a wild caught, and it produced animals that look. I mean, I don't know if you've seen some of the blushing on some of my animal, like my male that I held back, but looks totally different than a lot of the Calatoa stuff that I've seen. And then I took my female this year to a TK, and I'm sure it's going to produce different looking animals because, again, when you're introducing wild caught blood
yep,
into in wild caught blood that has not already been introduced several times, like my female, that was
exactly,
her first viable clutch that she's had, and so that's a different look and a different experience, and that you're going to see from her when she's paired to any Calatoa. So yeah, I mean, and I think we're close to getting past the days where we're going to have fresh wild caught productions, but when they do come along, it doesn't mean it's not legit because it doesn't look like a TK.
for sure. Yeah, and at the end of the day, too, I mean, I love the TK stuff because it's very like distinct, but at the same time, it's nice to have other stuff because even if you're breeding strictly locality stuff, like you don't, not that you don't, but I wouldn't want a room of like 20 of the exact same identical animals.
No, I
you
mean,
know,
and then
I want that variation. I want that, like some of them look crazy, like the silvers and greens or open back patterns or a stripe or this or that, where, you know, and especially like if you're selectively breeding, like say down the road, line breeding, whatever you want to call it, where you emphasize that open back or that those offset triangles or this or that. That's half of the fun of like, hey, let's see what happens when I do this and that. They're pure Calatoas, but you can go way in totally opposite directions on what you want to do depending on the animals themselves.
yeah, and I think Nathan would agree with me. Like, if you're trying to establish a market for these animals and stand out from the rest, don't get Calatoas that look like the rest.
Yeah, have a little bit of taste. Identify something that you find attractive, and I think you're going to find other people that think the same way.
Exactly.
Yeah, Nathan's got good taste. He's got a nice mustache.
Hey, I'm surprised I'm able to keep it as long as I have. The
It's
fiance
phenomenal.
hasn't made me shave it yet.
I rock the mustache.
Yeah, I work at a barber school and we did Spirit Week this week, so I did the full new boot goofing from Reno 911.
Nice.
Yeah, the
Did you say
girls
you had
loved it.
legit ostrich boots?
Oh yeah, my grandpa had some ostrich boots, so we did it up, buddy.
That's amazing. That's good stuff. So, I mean, let's kind of wrap up here. Anything else that you want to mention, Eric, in terms of Calatoa? What you like about them? What do you have? How many other localities do you have?
Just a Calatoa.
Okay,
Yeah.
you sold your Jamps?
No, actually, no. I have the gems. My bad. I forgot. Yeah.
They're just large Calatoas.
Yeah. No, they're actually like they've stayed like stupid small. Right now, they're what I think a little over 2 years old, give or take, and they're both male and female because they're basically on the exact. They're on the same feed schedule. I want to say they're 5 feet.
Man,
Yeah,
that's
I've
good.
seen videos from a few months back, and
Yeah.
they were pretty small.
Yeah, because Garrett, the last time when Garrett came, like he was saying, yeah, his were basically about the same size, and it's funny because I think I got John's holdbacks because they did that, joint breeding, and one of John sent me the pictures. They're all grouped together, and I was like, hey, I like this one and this one, and he was like, oh, okay, those were the ones I was gonna pick. I was like, oh, my bad. But yeah, I don't even know what I'm like. I don't really have a path with them, so it's like one of those things where I've debated selling them, but having like making Amory jams is cool. But at the same time, I don't really have anything further than that down the road if I do it. The only thing that would be cool, I know, because jams bring a ton of color that Calatoa doesn't have for the snow stuff. Like some of those high influence jam snows are their colors are absolutely insane. Yeah.
I find that phenomenon crazy because, like, if you look at a Jamp next to a Calatoa, like a non-anery Jamp, and you look at it next to a Calatoa, certainly you see a little bit more of the red hues and the orange hues, but like side by side, they're not drastically different. But once you start putting them into morphs, Jamps do something magical. I don't know
Yeah.
what it is.
Any of those like Amory jam combos are just absolutely insane. That's why I'm like, yeah, maybe breed them once, get some Amory jams out of it, and run that back to snows or this or that. So I haven't I don't know. I'm on the fence with him.
Garrett calls it jam sauce, and I like that term. A little bit of jam sauce. You got anything else for us, Eric? Anything that you want to talk about Calatoas or things that you think it's worth for people to listen, or maybe like a final message that we covered, but that you really want people to really understand and
The
know about this
biggest thing,
locality?
like for Calatoas or any of the localities, like I always tell people, like even if it's a pet, like go in, go in looking for them with the mindset of like you're doing purebred dogs or cats, where lineage is everything. Because at the end of the day, like you'll have these buyers ask you these, the standard questions, and I'm like, if you can't answer those same questions 5 years from now when you're producing yours, like you're dead in the water. There'll be cool snakes to sell, but you're not going to label them as whatever locality. It's like you have to do your homework because unfortunately, plenty of people out there, naming anything and everything. Oh, this is Calatoa, this is that. If they can't prove it, there's basic questions you can ask where if they can't answer, they can't provide details, and you can't confirm third party. Like if they say I got this from person A, and you go to person A and say, which I've had problems in the past where I go to person A and they're like, well, I don't really disclose previous sales, which I kind of understand. But at the same time, depending on locality stuff, I mean, we're
It's
into
a
it.
red flag.
It's it's been a short time with the Calatoa stuff, so it should be pretty easy to say, hey, you got it from this person who did, and just backtrack. You just got to do your homework because unfortunately, there's a ton of people almost every day on those groups posting, hey, I got this Calatoa. You're like, dude, that's a motley. What are you talking about? Like that's a Calatoa. I'm like,
Oh, that actually recently happened.
I'm just
Oh
like,
man.
it sucks for the person because like, they're new, they're excited. Hey, I got this, and you're like, oh my god, you like, yeah, it sucks. Like I bought animals when I got back into it from known big breeders. I got hosed on genetics, and they flat out lied to me. Then I confront them years later. Oh yeah, I did that. I'm like, oh
Yeah.
wow, thanks,
Yeah.
dude. So it
Yeah.
just sucks. You got to do your
Yeah.
homework.
Do your homework.
I consider myself incredibly lucky to have met you, met Richard Bilbo when I
Right.
first got into it. I mean, if I hadn't stumbled across you two, I don't know. I probably would have been one of those guys on the forums.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with like that stance, especially when you're getting any pure locality, especially with wild caught Calatoas, because today in this industry, Eric was mentioning like mainland people are starting to want to come over and they're really eager to get into the game. And I mean, I see a lot of people out there. Everything in their mom is a Calatoa right now, like
Yep.
everything, right? And so just be careful. as a matter of fact, like we mentioned earlier, go watch episode 6, Buying Super Dwarf Reticulated Pythons. And we talk more in discussion about what Eric Lee just mentioned about what me and Nathan do on how to do just your homework and make sure that you're not getting scammed or tricked into buying an animal that you think is going to end up manageable and then ends up not being.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the thing you need is something that you can't manage or you aren't prepared for. It's bad for everyone, and especially for the animal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the animal gets rehomed and then it gets rehomed, and that's why retakes are often neglected. It's a shitty reality, but yeah, if you own a retake, got to be responsible, and that starts with before you own the retake. Be responsible. All right. On that note, man, Eric, it was awesome having you. I hope Nathan does his cool little desk goodbye thing. He hasn't done that in a while, and I'm hoping that he does. But
Lucas likes my new desk quite a bit.
Yeah. So for those of you listening on Spotify and Apple Music, if you want to watch our videos and see how awkward we are on camera, go ahead and watch on YouTube and subscribe to the Retic Lounge. For those of you on our Patreon, we are recording, what's the date right now? This is the 30th of September. We have 23 Patreon members. You guys have been great. We're doing Patreon Discord lives every other week, and we are just now introducing some new footage, behind the scenes stuff that me and Nathan are doing per request that people are asking for, as well as some backside interview access that we got from Arlington. Come join the Retic Lounge community. It's great. Eric Lee, I will offer this invite out there. Anybody who does an interview with us, we would love to have you back on a Patreon, Discord, Zoom chat so that people can have direct access to ask you questions, talk to you, get to know you. So we'll connect later about that. Nathan, anything else before we head out? Nope. All right.
All good here.
Okay. You guys have a good night, good morning, good evening whenever you listen to this. Thank you so much for watching another episode of the Retic Lounge.
Take it easy, guys.
Later, Eric. Thank you.
Later. Anytime.
Yes, he did it. Okay.